My key would not turn. I stood at the front door of the house I had lived in for 11 years, bags in my hands, jet-lagged from a 4-day trip visiting my younger sister in another state. The lock just sat there, cold and stubborn, refusing to let me in. I tried again. Nothing. Then I heard footsteps from inside, slow and deliberate, like someone who already knew I was standing there and was taking their sweet time deciding whether to bother. The door opened maybe 6 inches. Not all the way. Just enough. My husband, Raymond, stood in the gap, wearing the blue shirt I had ironed for him 2 weeks before I left. Behind him, the hallway light was on. The same hallway I had repainted cream white 4 years ago. He looked at me the way a landlord looks at a tenant whose lease just expired. No warmth. No apology. No surprise. Just a flat, calculated stare. He held out a single suitcase. It was the brown one from the top shelf of our bedroom closet. The one I used for weekend trips. And then I saw her. Standing just behind him, leaning against the wall like she belonged there, wearing my grey robe. The one with my initials stitched on the pocket. Wearing it like it was already hers. Raymond's voice was calm. Almost gentle. This isn't your home anymore, Nadine. I did not move. I could not speak. I just stared at him, then at her, then at the suitcase in his hand. Behind them both, his mother, Evelyn, stepped into view from the kitchen doorway. She crossed her arms and nodded slowly, like this moment had been a long time coming and she was finally getting what she had always wanted. I did not scream. I did not cry on that porch. I had too much pride for that. But Raymond was not done. He wanted an audience, and unfortunately, he had one. Mrs. Okafor from next door had come outside to water her plants. 2 teenage boys from across the street were shooting hoops in the driveway. They all stopped. They all looked. Raymond stepped onto the porch like he was about to give a speech. He said I had contributed nothing to this marriage. That legally, the home belonged to him. That he had spoken to a lawyer and everything was in order. His voice never rose. He was perfectly calm, which somehow made it worse than if he had shouted. The woman in my robe appeared in the doorway. She smirked. Her name, I would later find out, was Paige. She was 26. Raymond was 43. I was 38. Evelyn stepped outside too. She looked at me with that practiced pity she had always kept ready, like a weapon stored in her purse. You should have kept yourself useful, Nadine, she said. A man like Raymond needs a woman who shows up. I was looking at her, trying to keep my face still, when the building's security guard, Mr. Ease, appeared at the bottom of the steps. Raymond had clearly called him. Mr. Ease looked embarrassed. He did not meet my eyes. Ma'am, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I have to ask you to leave the premises. I picked up the suitcase Raymond had placed at my feet. I walked down the steps. I did not look back. But I remembered every face that watched me go. I sat in my car for almost an hour without starting the engine. The suitcase was on the back seat. My phone was in my hand. My hands were shaking, though I kept telling myself to stop. Outside, the neighborhood went about its evening. Dogs being walked. Children being called inside for dinner. Normal life, moving forward, while mine sat completely still. I called my sister, Funmi, first. She picked up on the second ring and I heard her voice tighten the moment I started talking. She told me to breathe. She told me to find somewhere to sleep and that we would figure everything out tomorrow. But it was something else that kept turning over in my mind as I sat there. The deed. 3 years into our marriage, Raymond had suggested we simplify the paperwork on the house. He said it would make refinancing easier. He said having both our names on certain documents complicated things unnecessarily. He used words like administrative efficiency and just a formality. He showed me documents I did not fully read because I trusted him. Because back then, I still believed that trust was something a marriage was built on. I had signed whatever he placed in front of me. Sitting in my car outside a house I had lived in for 11 years, I finally understood what I had actually signed away. The house was in his name. Only his name. I had removed myself from it with my own hand, because he had asked me to, and I had loved him enough to say yes. I had been locked out of my own life. I stayed with Funmi for the first week. She lived 40 minutes away and she never once made me feel like a burden. She fed me jollof rice and gave me her spare room and sat with me at the kitchen table at midnight while I cried in a way I had not cried since our father passed. By the second week, I had found a short-term rental. A small flat above a dry cleaning shop. It smelled like steam and old fabric. The kitchen window looked out over a parking lot. It was the opposite of everything I had spent 11 years building. I learned through a mutual friend that Paige had moved in the same week I left. Not a few months later, not after some careful transition. The same week. Her clothes were already in the wardrobe. Her car was already in my parking space. Neighbors I had known for years apparently thought I was the one who had chosen to leave. That was the story Raymond had been quietly circulating before I even got home from visiting my sister. He had planned this. The lock change, the suitcase, the speech on the porch. It had all been arranged in advance. While I was away, he had been putting the final pieces in place. The narrative was already written. I was the woman who had walked away from a good thing. His story spread fast through our social circle. I started receiving polite, distant texts from people I had considered friends. Most of them never asked for my version. The credit card stopped working on a Tuesday. I was at a supermarket, buying groceries for the small flat. I had half a basket of things and the card just declined. I stood at the register feeling the eyes of the cashier and the people behind me, and I kept my face calm while my chest tightened. I paid with cash I had in my purse. Not much, but enough for that day. I went home and checked my accounts on my phone. Our joint account had been frozen. The shared card had been cancelled. I called the bank and was told, very politely, that the primary account holder had initiated the closure. Raymond's name had always been listed first on that account. Another thing I had not thought twice about at the time. I opened my banking app and went through every account I had access to, one by one. Most of them showed zero. Or worse, showed accounts I could no longer open. Then I reached the bottom of the list. There was one account I had almost forgotten about. An old business account. One I had opened myself, 7 years ago, before Raymond's consulting firm had grown into what it became. Back when it was just an idea on paper and a laptop on our dining table. Back when it was the two of us working on it together. That account was still there. Still active. Still solely in my name. I stared at the number on the screen for a long time. Not the balance, though that mattered too. What I was looking at was the account itself. And I began to remember exactly what it was connected to. Raymond's consulting firm, Bright Line Advisory, had started in our second bedroom. I had been there for every part of it. I helped him write the original business plan, line by line, at our kitchen table at 2 a.m. I had designed the first company logo on my laptop. I had made the calls to register the business, and I was the one who had walked into the bank to open the original business account. My name. My signature. My identity documents. In those early years, Raymond was the face of the company. He took the meetings, built the relationships, gave the presentations. But I was the one behind everything else. The filings. The compliance paperwork. The early contracts. The bookkeeping. When the firm grew and he brought in a proper accountant and a legal team, the business structure was reorganized. New accounts were opened under a cleaner corporate structure. The firm moved to professional offices. Raymond became the sole director on the new filings. But something had been overlooked. Or perhaps never addressed at all. That original business account I had opened 7 years ago was still active. Still in my name. And it was connected to the original parent entity of Bright Line Advisory, which had never been formally dissolved. The newer structure had been built on top of it, but the foundation was still there. My name was still on that foundation. I did not yet understand the full significance of what that meant. But I knew I needed a lawyer. Raymond filed for divorce on a Friday. 14 days after he handed me that suitcase on the porch. I found out through a letter that arrived at Funme's address, which I had given as my temporary contact. The letter was precise and thorough. It listed the assets Raymond was claiming. The house. The 2 cars. The investments. The business interests. Everything. There was a proposed settlement figure that was so low it almost seemed like a joke. $30,000 to close out 11 years of marriage and walk quietly away. His lawyer's letter was confident in tone. There were no hedges, no diplomatic softening. It read like a document written by someone who believed the other side had nothing to fight with. And Raymond believed exactly that. I could feel it in the language of every paragraph. He had done his calculations. He knew I was not on the house deed. He knew the joint accounts were gone. He believed the business was entirely his. From where he was standing, he had covered every angle. He had structured everything carefully, and he was now simply waiting for me to accept the terms and disappear. He thought I had nothing. That was his only real mistake. Not the biggest one he had made in our marriage, but the most expensive. Because while Raymond was feeling confident in his rented office across town, I was in a consultation room with an attorney named Ms. Adiz Obi, placing a folder of documents on the table between us. And I was about to discover that the man who thought he owned everything had left one door open. Evelyn called me on a Wednesday evening. I almost did not pick up. We had never been close. She was the kind of woman who communicated in layers, always saying one thing and meaning another, always positioning herself carefully before speaking. I had learned over 11 years to listen to what she did not say as much as what she did. She called it a courtesy call. She said she was reaching out because she cared about my well-being. She suggested I speak to a financial advisor quickly, settle quietly, and move on with my life before things became complicated. She said fighting would only embarrass me and drain whatever little resources I had left. I listened without interrupting. I made small sounds to let her know I was still on the line. Then she said something interesting. She said that Raymond had worked too hard building that company to have it disrupted by a messy divorce. She talked about Bright Line Advisory like it was entirely his creation. She mentioned the expansion plans, the new investors, the loan he had recently secured to grow the business. She said his future was finally coming together and it would be a shame for bitterness to get in the way of that. What she did not know was that she had just told me something valuable. She assumed he owned the company fully. She assumed that was settled. She assumed there was no question about it. The confidence in her voice told me that Raymond had told her the same story he had told everyone else. That this was completely his. That there was nothing to contest. He was wrong. And his mother had just reminded me to look more carefully at why. Ms. Obi was exactly the kind of lawyer I needed. She was calm. She asked precise questions. She did not waste words. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and she had a habit of tapping her pen against her notepad when something caught her attention. In our first meeting, she tapped the pen more than I expected. I brought everything I could find. The original business registration documents. The bank account records from that early account in my name. The email chains from those first 2 years where Raymond and I had gone back and forth on contracts and filings. Old photographs I had taken of the whiteboard in our second bedroom where we had mapped out the entire business structure together. Even text messages from that period where Raymond had asked me to handle specific legal paperwork on his behalf. Ms. Obi read through everything slowly and methodically. It took about 40 minutes before she removed her glasses, looked up at me, and said, "Mrs. Nadine, what you have here is more significant than you may realize." She explained it clearly. The original company formed 7 years ago had been registered as a partnership. Raymond had later restructured the business, yes. But that restructuring had been done through the newer entity. The original parent company, the one my name was on, had never been formally dissolved. No legal amendment had been filed to remove me as co-owner. On paper, that original entity still existed. And it still listed me as an equal partner. Ms. Obi spent the next 2 days pulling additional records. What she found confirmed everything. The parent entity of Bright Line Advisory, the foundational shell company that everything else had been built on, had never been terminated. It had simply been left dormant while the newer operational structure ran on top of it. Raymond's lawyers had either overlooked it or assumed it was irrelevant. It was not irrelevant. Because the newer structure, the one Raymond had reorganized the business under, was a subsidiary of that original parent company. Legally, the parent company's existence and ownership structure could not simply be ignored. And that parent company still listed both of us as co-owners, with equal shares. This meant one critical thing: Raymond did not have full ownership of Bright Line Advisory. Not legally. Not on paper. Ms. Obi explained it carefully. She said that in any legal proceeding, this would need to be resolved. That Raymond could not represent himself as the sole owner of a company that had an undissolved parent entity with a co-owner still listed on the founding documents. I asked her what this meant practically. She said it meant that any financial decisions Raymond made based on sole ownership of the business, including securing loans, signing agreements with investors, or entering into contracts, could be legally challenged, because they were made without the knowledge or consent of an equal partner. I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked her what Raymond had recently used the business to secure. She looked at her notes. According to the records you brought, a renovation loan on the family home. The loan had been taken out 6 weeks before Raymond handed me that suitcase. That detail sat in my chest like a stone when I first understood it. He had not acted on impulse. He had not woken up one day and decided he was done. He had planned it methodically. He had secured the financing, put the paperwork in order, arranged the new lock, prepared the suitcase, and waited for me to leave for my sisters. Then he had executed everything while I was 4 states away, completely unaware. The renovation loan was substantial. Over $80,000. It had been approved based on Raymond presenting himself as the sole owner of Bright Line Advisory and using the company's equity as leverage. The loan was tied to the business. The business was collateral. Paige had apparently been involved in choosing the renovations. I heard through FundMe, who heard through a neighbor, that they had gutted the kitchen entirely. New island. New cabinets. White marble countertops. The kind of thing you do when you are settling in and planning to stay. Contractors had started work within 2 weeks of my departure. Raymond was building a life on top of the one I had helped him create. He was using money borrowed against a business I had helped him found, renovating a house I had helped him furnish, for a woman who had been wearing my robe before I was even out of the driveway. And he had done all of this without knowing that the legal foundation of his business still had my name on it. The renovation was almost finished. The loan was fully drawn. And Raymond had no idea what was about to shift. Ms. Obi laid it out carefully across her desk. The renovation loan had been issued by a commercial bank. The approval had been based on Raymond's representation that he held full ownership of Bright Line Advisory and that the company's assets could be used as collateral. That representation appeared in the loan documents. Ms. Obi explained the risk. If we filed for legal clarification of the ownership structure of the original parent entity, the bank would be notified as part of standard legal process. The bank had issued funds based on a claim of sole ownership. If that claim was now being contested in court, the bank would be required to conduct a review of the loan's basis. Depending on their findings, they could pause, reassess, or in certain circumstances, call in the loan. She was very careful not to promise outcomes. But she explained the legal mechanics clearly. We are not filing this to cause harm, she said. We are filing it to have your legitimate ownership recognized. Whatever follows from that is a consequence of the existing legal structure, not of anything you are creating. I asked her how strong our position was. She removed her glasses and looked at me directly. You have the founding documents. You have the original bank account. You have an undissolved parent entity with your name legally registered on it. You have email evidence of your direct involvement in the company's early operations. Mrs. Nadine, your position is not weak. I told her to file. 3 weeks after I moved into the flat above the dry cleaning shop, Raymond and Paige hosted a housewarming party. FundMe told me about it. She had heard from Mrs. Okafor, the same neighbor who had been watering her plants the evening I was handed that suitcase on the porch. Mrs. Okafor had received an invitation, which she had declined, but she had watched the guests arrive from her kitchen window. Apparently it was a proper event. Catered food. String lights along the back fence. About 30 people, including several of Raymond's business contacts and a few of the mutual friends who had quietly chosen his side in the weeks following the separation. Paige had apparently played the role of hostess with enthusiasm. She walked people through the renovated kitchen. She pointed out the marble countertops, the new island, the repainted living room. Several people apparently told her it was beautiful. She accepted the compliments warmly. They toasted to new beginnings. Raymond wore the dark blazer he always wore when he wanted to look impressive. Mrs. Okafor told FundMe that Raymond seemed relaxed that evening. Happy, even. Like a man who had made a difficult decision and found peace on the other side of it. He had no idea that 4 days earlier, a legal filing had been submitted to the commercial court requesting clarification of the ownership structure of a dormant parent company called Bright Line Advisory Holdings. He had no idea that a copy of that filing had been forwarded to his bank by standard legal protocol. He was standing in my former kitchen, showing off my former home, entirely unaware that the floor had already begun to shift beneath him. I want to be clear about something. I did not file for asset clarification because I wanted to ruin Raymond. I am not built that way. What I felt in those weeks was not rage, though I had every right to it. It was something colder and quieter. A kind of clear-eyed focus that came from understanding, finally and completely, what had been done to me. I had given 11 years to that marriage. I had worked beside Raymond in those early difficult years when the business was nothing but a name and a hope. I had handled the paperwork, the filings, the early calls with accountants and lawyers when he was too busy or too tired. I had kept our household running smoothly. I had supported his ambitions without asking much for my own. And then I had been handed a suitcase on my own porch and told to leave. So I was not filing out of spite. I was filing because what I was claiming was real. My name was on those documents. My contributions were documented. My ownership stake existed whether Raymond acknowledged it or not. The law does not care about feelings. It cares about what is written down, what is registered, what is filed and dated and signed. I had learned that lesson the hard way when I signed my name off that house deed. Now I was going to apply it in the other direction. Ms. Obi submitted the filing on a Thursday morning. Clean. Professional. No drama. Just a request for legal recognition of what already existed. The first crack appeared 11 days after the filing. Raymond's bank sent him a letter requesting additional documentation related to the Bright Line Advisory Holdings loan. The letter was formal and procedural. It noted that a legal proceeding had been initiated regarding the ownership structure of a parent entity connected to the collateral used to secure the loan. The bank was conducting a standard review. Raymond called Ms. Obi's office 3 times that first day. She did not take his calls. He then called my mobile. I saw his name on the screen and let it ring. He left a voicemail. His voice had lost the easy confidence I had heard on the porch. He said the filing was unnecessary. He said I was causing problems out of bitterness. He said we could resolve this privately if I would just agree to speak with him. I listened to the voicemail once, then deleted it. Funmi called me that evening and I could hear the smile in her voice. She said Raymond had also called her, looking for information. She had told him she did not have anything to say to him and ended the call. I found out from Ms. Obi the following week that the bank had formally opened a loan review. While the review was in progress, no additional funds could be drawn and the loan terms were under reassessment. The renovation had been fully funded already, so that did not change what had been spent. But what it meant was that Raymond's relationship with the bank was now under scrutiny, and his claim to sole ownership of his business was no longer something he could state without challenge. His confidence had wobbled. For the first time since that evening on the porch, Raymond was not entirely in control. He showed up at the dry cleaning shop on a Tuesday afternoon. I was upstairs in my flat when I heard the buzzer. I looked through the window and saw his car parked on the street. I considered not answering, but I was tired of avoiding things. I went downstairs. I stepped outside rather than letting him in. We stood on the pavement in front of the shop. He was wearing the charcoal suit he wore when he wanted to feel authoritative. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing the thing they always did when he was trying to manage something without showing that he was rattled. He said I was sabotaging him. He said the filing was vindictive and unprofessional. He said it was designed to cause damage rather than resolve anything genuinely. He said that if I had any concerns about the business or the marriage, the right approach was a private settlement, not legal action. I let him finish. Then I said, Raymond, I am not sabotaging anything. I am simply acknowledging what already exists. My name is on those founding documents. That is not something I created. That is something we both created, 7 years ago, at our kitchen table. He looked at me for a long moment. You'll regret this, he said. I've been regretting things for years, I said. This is not one of them. He got back in his car. I went back upstairs and sat at the kitchen window overlooking the parking lot, and I breathed carefully until my hands stopped shaking. Evelyn called again. This time her voice sounded nothing like it had in our first conversation. That first call had been smooth and controlled, full of advice delivered from a position of absolute certainty. This call was different. She stumbled over her opening sentence. She asked how I was doing, which she had never asked before. Then she got to the point. She asked if I would consider withdrawing the filing. She framed it as a gesture of goodwill. She said that Raymond was under pressure and that the legal proceedings were affecting his health. She said that whatever had happened between us could be resolved more simply if we both chose to handle it with maturity. I listened. Then I asked her a question. I asked if she had known, when she stood in that doorway nodding while her son handed me my suitcase, that his loan had been secured using a business I was still legally co-owner of. There was a long pause. That's not relevant, she said finally. It actually is very relevant, I said. It's the most relevant thing. She shifted back to the language of maturity and resolution. She said this was becoming bigger than necessary. She said families could tear themselves apart over things like this. I told her I had not chosen the direction this went. I told her I had simply stopped walking away from what was mine. She ended the call without saying goodbye. Her confidence, that polished certainty she had worn on the porch the evening she watched me leave, was completely gone. Ms. Obi called me on a Thursday with updates. The bank had completed their initial review and had several concerns. The loan had been issued on the basis of sole ownership. The existence of an undissolved parent entity with a co-owner on record meant that the collateral representation in the loan agreement was incomplete at best, and potentially inaccurate. The bank's legal team had advised a formal reassessment. The practical consequence was significant. Raymond's renovation loan was now under hold. No further disbursements, which did not matter since the funds had already been used. But more importantly, the bank had flagged the loan for reassessment of its terms. Until the ownership question was legally resolved, the loan existed in a kind of legal uncertainty that the bank was not comfortable with. Raymond's contractor called to confirm completion of work and request final payment. Raymond paid. But a second contractor he had been planning to bring in for additional work on the property was informed by Raymond that the project was paused. Work on the house stopped. I heard from FundMe that Paige had begun asking questions. She was not the kind of person who had signed up for uncertainty. She had made a choice about Raymond based on a specific picture: successful businessman, beautiful home, uncomplicated future. That picture was developing cracks. The marble countertops were in. The renovation was done. But the ease and confidence that had filled that house since she moved in had begun, quietly and steadily, to drain away. The social fallout was gradual but real. Word travels in circles, and our circle was not large. People who knew Raymond in a professional capacity started hearing, through various channels, that his ownership of Brightline Advisory was being contested in court. Business associates do not like uncertainty. They especially do not like it when a man who has been representing himself as the sole owner of a company is suddenly sharing news articles or LinkedIn updates that have nothing to do with legal disputes, while behind the scenes, his bank is conducting a loan review. A joint dinner invitation that Raymond and Paige had extended to two couples they had been friendly with was declined. Both couples gave vague reasons. Neither explained properly. One of Raymond's newer clients, a mid-size logistics company that had been in late-stage contract discussions with Brightline Advisory, paused the negotiations. They sent a polite email stating they were re-evaluating their consulting needs. Ms. Obi later confirmed that their legal team had found the ownership dispute during routine due diligence. The whispers were not dramatic. Nobody was shouting. But in professional and social circles, whispers do not need volume to be effective. They just need to be heard by the right people at the right moment. Raymond's carefully arranged world was not collapsing. Not yet. But the edges were fraying. The confidence that had allowed him to stand on that porch and tell me this was no longer my home was being tested, quietly and consistently, by the very legal reality he had overlooked. Legal discovery is methodical and honest in a way that conversations never are. As part of the ownership clarification proceedings, both sides were required to submit supporting documentation. Ms. Obi compiled everything meticulously. The founding documents. The original bank account records. The business registration filings from 7 years ago. The tax records from the early years, which showed the business listed under both our names. Email correspondence in which Raymond had explicitly asked me to handle legal filings on behalf of the company. Contracts from those first clients, which had been signed during a period when I was actively managing the administrative operations of the business. When Raymond's legal team received the full document package, Ms. Obi told me the response was notably quiet. No counter-arguments. No claims that the documents were fabricated or irrelevant. Just silence, and then a request for a 2-week extension to review the materials. The documents told a story that could not be cleanly argued against. I had been there. I had done the work. The records showed it. The filings confirmed it. The timeline was consistent and clear. Raymond had spent years as the face of Bright Line Advisory. He had attended the conferences, shaken the hands, given the presentations. He had accepted the credit and built an identity around it. But the paperwork, the quiet, unsexy, foundational paperwork, had my fingerprints all over it. And paperwork does not forget. Page left on a Saturday. I did not witness it. I heard about it from Funme, who heard about it from Mrs. Okafor, who saw the removal van arrive at 7 in the morning. By 10 o'clock it was gone, along with Page's furniture, her clothing, and reportedly, the decorative items she had bought to personalize the living room. She left a note. I never saw it, but Funme told me what Mrs. Okafor had been told by another neighbor who had spoken to Raymond afterward. The note apparently said she had not signed up for instability, that she had made a decision about her future based on a clear picture of what Raymond had and what he was building. That picture had changed. She was not willing to restructure her life around something uncertain. The marble countertops stayed. The new kitchen island stayed. The string lights she had put up along the back fence stayed, at least for a few weeks, until Raymond took them down. She had moved in before I was even out of the driveway. She had been wearing my robe on the evening I was handed a suitcase and told I had no place in that house. She had smiled from the doorway while Raymond gave his little speech on the porch. And now she was gone, taking her certainty with her, because the upgrade she had chosen had turned out to be built on ground that was not as solid as it had appeared. The house that Raymond had renovated for her stood finished and empty of her presence. Raymond's lawyer contacted Ms. Obi with a settlement offer. It was significantly higher than the original figure Raymond had proposed in those early divorce papers. That first offer had been $30,000 and an expectation that I would be grateful for it. This new figure was different. It was attached to a proposal that acknowledged my early contributions to the business and offered a buyout of my ownership stake in the parent entity. The number was better. But the offer was still structured to make me disappear cleanly and quickly. Ms. Obi presented it to me without recommendation in either direction. She laid out the pros and the cons. She told me what accepting would mean financially and legally. She told me what continuing would mean in terms of time, cost, and uncertainty of outcome. I sat with it overnight. Then I called her the next morning and told her to decline. Not because the number was too low, though it was. But because accepting it would mean agreeing to a story that was not true. It would mean nodding along to the version of events in which Raymond had built Bright Line Advisory alone, and I was simply someone who had been nearby during that process. Someone to be compensated and dismissed. I had already been dismissed once, on that porch, in front of my neighbors. I was not going to let a legal document do it a second time. I told Ms. Obi I wanted full recognition of what the records showed. Not a buyout. A proper ruling. The court date was a Thursday in early spring. The hearing was not dramatic. Courts rarely are, from the outside. It was a conference room with fluorescent lighting and a judge who had clearly reviewed the documents carefully before we arrived. Both legal teams were present. Raymond sat on the opposite side of a long table. He looked tired in a way I had not seen before. The easy confidence that had followed him through the months since the porch was gone. The judge had reviewed the founding documents. She had reviewed the original bank account records. She had reviewed the email correspondence, the tax filings, the registration papers. She had listened to both legal teams. Her ruling was clear and thorough. The original parent entity of Bright Line Advisory had never been legally dissolved. The legal steps required to formally remove a registered partner from a business entity had never been taken. My ownership stake remained valid under the original founding structure. I remained a legal equity partner in Bright Line Advisory Holdings. Raymond's lawyer requested a stay of judgment. The judge declined. I did not celebrate in the room. I nodded when Ms. Obi looked at me. I kept my face still. But when we stepped into the corridor afterward and Ms. Obi shook my hand with both of hers and said, "Well done," I felt something release in my chest that had been wound tight since the night I found my key would not turn. The consequences moved quickly after that. The bank received the court's ruling within 3 business days. Their legal team reviewed it thoroughly and reached their conclusion by the end of the following week. The renovation loan had been secured based on a representation of sole ownership. That representation was now ruled legally inaccurate. The collateral basis of the loan was compromised. The bank issued Raymond a formal notice. The loan was being called in for reassessment under updated terms. Given the change in the ownership status of the collateral, the original loan agreement could not stand as structured. Raymond had two options: renegotiate the loan under new terms that accounted for shared ownership, or repay the outstanding balance. He could not renegotiate. A bank does not offer favorable terms to a borrower whose collateral has just been disputed in court and whose business partner has just been legally confirmed. And he could not comfortably repay $80,000. He attempted to refinance the house to cover it. The application was declined. The house carried its own existing mortgage, and the combination of the business dispute, the loan reassessment, and his changed financial profile made the refinancing unattractive to lenders. Contractors who were owed for completed work filed their invoices. Some of them had to chase for payment. The logistics client that had paused negotiations confirmed they would not be proceeding. The life Raymond had built, the loan, the renovations, the expanded business profile, had all rested on a foundation of sole ownership he had never actually possessed. And now the foundation was gone. I moved into my new home on a bright morning in late spring. It was smaller than the house I had shared with Raymond. A two-bedroom flat in a clean, quiet building, with large windows and a kitchen that caught the afternoon light. I chose everything in it myself. The paint color on the walls. The curtains. The coffee table from the weekend market that Funme helped me carry up the stairs. Every single thing in that space was something I had selected, because I wanted it, with my own money. Raymond eventually sold the house. He had no real choice. Between the loan obligations, the failed refinancing attempt, and the legal costs he had accumulated, holding it had become unsustainable. Mrs. Okafor texted Funme to say a young family had moved in. They seemed nice. They put a small bicycle in the front garden. I received one final message from Evelyn. It came on a Sunday evening, several months after the court ruling. It was brief. No opening pleasantry. No acknowledgement of anything that had happened. It simply said, "You didn't have to ruin everything." I read it twice. Then I put my phone down and walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the evening. I had not ruined anything. I had simply refused to disappear. I had refused to accept a suitcase and a dismissal as the final word on 11 years of contribution. I had refused to be quietly settled and forgotten by a man who had used my name to build his foundation and then tried to remove me from it. My name had always been on those documents. All I had done was remind the world of that fact. Some people call that revenge. I call it recognition. And it was a long time coming.